What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Good With Project. I'm your host, Jerry Scarlato, and today's conversation is with Amber Larkins. Amber is an entrepreneur, photographer, and host of the Through the Trauma podcast. Throughout this conversation, we talk about how Amber accumulated mindset changes and accumulated characteristics that help her build resilience along the way, help her build resilience to overcome her body dysmorphia, help build mental resilience to overcome her fears of speaking whenever she first started her business and whenever she first started her podcast, and how she changed her mindset around certain aspects of herself and her life so that she could become more comfortable with herself and more confident with herself. Because what many people don't notice is that all of us have some level of something about us that we struggle with. Some of us have come to a resolution with that and have been able to work through it and move forward. Some of us have not. Amber is a good-looking girl, blonde hair, blue eyes, good-looking girl, and she talks about how she struggles with or has struggled with, and still continues to struggle, but certainly has came a long way with body image and how that's been a struggle her whole life. And many people will look at her and be very surprised by that. But you cannot judge a book by its cover. You don't know what somebody else is going through and how somebody else struggled to get where they are and the things that they had to overcome to get where they are until you've actually talked to them. Amber is very successful at what she does in her photography business and in her podcast. But again, she had to overcome many things that you'll hear throughout this conversation. And it's worth remembering that all people who start things and you look at them and you go, man, it's so easy for them to do that. They had to overcome a lot to get there. And that's what you'll hear throughout this podcast. So I know you'll enjoy this. Make sure that you share this with anybody that you know will be inspired as well. Get your pen and paper out and enjoy this conversation with Amber Larkins. Miss Amber, we're gonna have a good conversation today, and I know that because we're both fitness people. I'm always excited to talk to another fitness person. Maybe it's a meathead in me that kind of gets excited about that kind of thing, but no, in all seriousness, I know that you have been into fitness for much of your life. I know the beginning of your life, you were maybe deeper in it than you are now. So, since your podcast is through the trauma, correct?
Mhm. Yes.
Um, since you like to help let other people tell their stories and their hero's journey, if you will, I'd like to start at the beginning of your story and talk a little bit about how you got into fitness, or maybe we can start before that if there's something relevant before that. But how'd you get into fitness? How has that played a role in your life?
Yeah, it's so funny. I dabble in so many different things, and I think you and I, like, we both do video stuff too, so we have a lot in common. But I've dabbled in a lot of things over the years, and it's funny because I started getting interested in fitness when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. Growing up, I was super skinny. I just was very lanky. Like I had body image issues. People think because you're skinny, you don't have body image issues, but I did.
Yeah. Oh, for
And
sure.
I was always attracted to this muscular physique. I remember when I was a kid, I'd go into the grocery store with my mom and we would she would do grocery shopping and I would be in the magazine rack, like looking at bodybuilding magazines. And I would tell her, like, I'm going to look like this one day. And she's like, no, please don't. But, um, but I loved it. I just loved the sport. And so when I got in high school, I took a weightlifting class. I could not even bench press the bar. I'm in there with a lot of athletes, so I'm not an athlete at all. And I couldn't even bench press the bar. And I remember feeling so embarrassed. And I just, it was one of those things where I'm like, I will do this or die. So I got into college, started hanging out with people that lifted weights. And, this was back in, I graduated high school in 98. This tells you how old I am.
Yeah.
And, and
You
so,
look wonderful, sister. You look
well,
wonderful.
thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Um, and then into college, which was like the 2000-ish, this was before fitness was mainstream. Like it was a very tight niche group of people. And so he started hanging around with like the meatheads, you would call them.
Yeah.
And so I got enamored in it. I loved it. And I loved gaining muscle. I loved the dieting. I started competing. And this was like when there was, I don't know, two, three people in a class. Now there's like 20, 40 in a class. Um, so I got into that. I did that for several
Was that
years.
when, sorry to interrupt,
Oh, you're
that's when it
good.
was just figure, correct? They didn't have like bikini and
Yeah,
swimsuit and all these other things either. It was
that's right.
figure. Figure and
Yeah,
bodybuilding were
yeah.
probably the only two options.
And if you can remember, if you were familiar with the sport at that time, figure had two suits. We had a full piece suit and a two-piece suit.
Mhm.
And they were beautiful. The one-piece suits were gorgeous. Like I wish they'd bring it back, honestly, because it was just so pretty. They were so formal, but yet it was a suit. Um, but yeah, it was a great experience, a great time. But I got kind of started getting burned out. You do it for a while, it's a sport that's really hard to stay involved in. I got burned out, and then I had went through some things in my life just kind of pushed me out of that sport. I ended up getting married, and when I got married, my husband at the time was like, I don't know how I feel about you, being in that little suit and those little shorts. Because I was also working with a supplement company at going to the Arnold, going to the Olympia, like working these big trade shows. So, and they would have us in like skimpy clothes,
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
So I'm like, you're probably right. So I kind of got out of it and it was a good break. And then I started feeling the itch again, but not necessarily to compete, but I felt the itch for the industry. So I had, at that time I was married, just had my son. And I'm like, I hired a photographer to come over to photograph pictures of my son. And I'm like, it's funny because I could do this. Like I'm missing I'm letting a photographer come in, but she's here for an hour, but then I'm missing all the other moments. So I ordered a camera and got the camera and did not even know what the first thing to do with it. I like turned it on. I'm like, I don't even know how to use this thing because it was a professional camera. But completely taught myself how to do photography through YouTube and YouTube University
Right.
and Google. And then I thought, it'd be fun to get back into the industry by doing fitness. So I started just kind of putting it out there. I had a friend that was competing in the gym that I worked out at the time. Now I'm in a whole nother state. People don't even know that I used to compete. They don't even know that I like was into fitness like I was. And I'm like, hey, can I take your pictures? And she's like, yeah, I would love to. I'd love that. So we set up a time, I do her photos, and then word just began to spread. She told her trainer told people he
Mhm.
was training. And before you know it, I'm like charging a little bit of money, upgrading my equipment, learning more, putting more into my education. And then that's how I got into photography. So it's
Wow.
funny because this also leads to my podcast, which I don't know if you want me to get into that now or if you want me to stop there so you can ask
Let's hit the
questions.
pause button because I think there's some things to unpack there. But no, that's super cool that oh, I think I just bumped into this thing. Anyway, that's super cool that that's how you got back or that's how you got into photography. I love that story how you just went up to somebody and asked them to take their picture. Not somebody. It sounds like you knew the girl at the gym, but just went up and kind of took your first step out and asked her, and she accepted, and then that led to others, and then that led to others, and then word of mouth just really helped it spread. I find that a lot of people, especially in I'll say, the creative world happens sort of similar where they ask one person to do their thing for them, whether it's a website or photography or content or something to that effect. And they're like, yeah, well, I'll let you do it. And then they do a good job with that person. And then it kind of spreads to other people. So, that just goes to show if you're good at what you do, then it can start with just one person. I think a lot of people are just scared to take that first step. Did you feel yourself being intimidated taking the first step? what were some of the things that you had to overcome mentally? Was it pretty simple because you knew the person?
Well, I knew her, but we were not like close friends. I just would say hi to her when I saw her in the gym, and she looked great. She looked phenomenal. And I'd tell her like, "Oh, you look great," you know. And she'd tell me sometimes like, "Oh, yeah, it's this many weeks till my show or whatever." But I remember I contemplated this for several days actually before I asked her. And then one day I remember exactly like she was on the cable row. And I just went up to her. I'm like, hey, I got this camera and I'm just kind of like thinking about shooting some fitness. Would you let me take your photos? And she's like, yeah. She was real like all for it. She's a really sweet girl too. And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, so now we got to figure out a place to shoot. She's like, well, my trainer has the gym that he is affiliated with. He knows the owner, and the owner will let us shoot there. And so I didn't have any lighting equipment, nothing. And that gym was not an easy gym to shoot in. So I'm not going to say those
Gyms
pictures
rarely
looked
are.
phenomenal.
Hmm. Gyms
They
are hard
were,
to shoot in for sure.
they're really hard. And this one was small. And I just, you know, I didn't know anything. So we go in. She loved the photos, but looking back on those, I'm like, well, I guess you got to start somewhere.
Oh, it's very true for sure. Yeah, I owned a fitness studio for 10 years. I just got out of that last year, and we'd shoot um, whatever, YouTube videos and social media videos and stuff like that on there. And we had high ceilings at least. So like those fluorescent lights weren't like down low and like right on top of you. So that was helpful. But even still, it felt like there was always just like shadows everywhere. Like it was just not good. But yeah, in like a commercial setting or even like a small gym setting, it's tough because of those fluorescent lights or just how low the lights are and with the equipment everywhere, like it just makes it challenging for sure.
This gym was probably extra challenging because the light temperature didn't match. So he had like some fluorescent, some like on the wall. Like it didn't match. And then the walls were like red and yellow.
Oh,
So
geez. That's
as a
that's beautiful.
now as an experienced photographer, you're like,
Mm.
whoa, like that. How did you even make that work? I'm
Yeah.
just telling you, like it probably didn't work, but it worked for her
Yeah.
and it worked for my business. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to go back up a little more. So before you started working out, you were mentioned how you were thin and how you didn't, you weren't excited about being thin. That is something that's very real. It's super easy to overlook the thoughts and feelings that somebody who's thin goes through. Like my now ex-wife, she was never any heavier than about 115 pounds. When I met her, she was like 109 and she's like 5'6". So she's not short. And she always had a hard time putting on weight and she always struggled with it. And she felt bad about it. And of course, everyone's like, oh, here, eat something, Kate. Here, stuff this in your mouth. You need to eat more. You need to put on some weight. But she never felt like she knew that she wanted to be able to do that. So it's very easy for people to overlook that. So do you feel like once you got into fitness, that was able to kind of, I don't want to say bury, but help you overcome those feelings of, I don't know, insecurity maybe that you had when you were thin?
So here's the thing. I do think it did in some regard. I mean, obviously I started to like how I looked better. I remember the first time like I actually had like my stomach. I was like, "Oh, I like this." I mean, now I'm in my 40s and I don't like that. You know, now it's like I want abs. But
Mm.
back then it was like, "Oh, I had never seen that before or experienced that." And I was so super thin that like I had no butt at all. Like now butts are a big thing.
Yeah.
So I would do a crap load of squats to like, I was like, I will build a glutes if it's going to kill me. And so I'd lift really, really heavy on glutes. So when I started to see these changes in my body, I was like, okay, I like where this is going. But I would also say sometimes when there's self-image issues, it's deeper than just superficial, like what you look like on the outside. there's deeper rooted things going on. And I think that the deeper rooted things, like obviously, no matter what you do to your visual, to your person visually, like to how you look or the vanity
Physique.
factor,
Yeah. Mhm.
it's not gonna fix internal issues that, you know, things that you picked up along the way, childhood traumas and things that have happened to you along the way, or things that people have said. Because even if you change, there's this thing with people who have like eating disorders, and they can get really, really, really thin, but then they never feel like they're thin enough. Or body dysmorphia for bodybuilders is a huge thing too. Like people, oh, you're getting too big, and they're just, but in their minds, they still feel really small. So there's I think that it helps in one regard, but we can't add to the physique and the outer appearance without also correcting what's going on in the inner traumas and inner things that happen to us.
For sure. I think many people tend to easily overlook, and partly ignore that. And I say partly because it's it's subconscious that maybe they ignore it because we don't like to feel bad about things. And whenever we think about, say, those things that are in the back of our mind and that are keeping us from actually feeling good about ourselves fully, feeling good about our physique, feeling good about where we are in life, um, it feels bad whenever you think about those things. Of course, it's no fun, but without doing the work to figure out what that is and where it came from so that you can move forward from it, then it's always going to kind of be there and it's always going to hold you in your place. How did you start to figure that part out for you? Like, did you see that early, that kind of hidden part early, or did it take you a little longer to figure that out?
No, I mean it's taken a lifetime. I mean, honestly, just a self growth mindset, which is not something I do think it's something you can make up your mind. Like, I want to be the best I can be, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I want to be the best person I can be. And it's a decision that you make. But I don't want to say that I wanted all of those things at first. When I was younger, I wanted to look a certain way. It was vanity metrics, that was it. Um, but when you realize vanity is not gonna, it doesn't cover all the things. It only covers one factor. And it takes time to learn that too. It takes time to see, like, over the course of a lifetime, where things happen. And then it's like, okay, things happen to me, or things happen because of me, even like decisions that I've made has been bad decisions. But it puts a mirror in your face, and you're like, okay, now I've got to figure out. And I've always kind of, I think I've always been kind of a more like thoughtful person. Like, I do try to think through things, and ultimately, I do want to be a good person. So it's like, I want to be the best I can be. But I do think also that competitive mentality of like fitness was foundational for me. So it still like, I compare everything back to fitness, what goes on in my business, what goes on in my life, you know, I can compare everything. Just the other day, like, I was going through some stuff, and I thought, like, I feel like I'm being broken and crushed. And I'm like, yeah, but Amber, that's exactly what happens to the muscle when it's growing. So you're growing, you know? So it's like, I compare everything back to fitness. So it's very foundational in my life.
Well, and it's the perfect analogy in my mind for any part of life, especially for an entrepreneur going through a business cycle and growing a business, starting a business, the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows. Like, that's what fitness is. Whenever you start fitness in the beginning, it's hard to get started. You have to convince yourself to get started. You're like, okay, maybe for you and I, it wasn't hard. I think when you're younger, it's a little easier because you're like, yeah, I want to look sexy. Let's go. Let's go. Let's get in there and do it. But so at the fitness studio, our average member was between 45 and 60 years old. For them, it's hard. The average person, it took them 18 months to walk through the door. From the time that they saw that we were there to the time they walked through the door, it took them 18 months. So once you get to a certain age, it's tough to actually get yourself to do it. And with business, it's hard as well. Once you get started, it's hard, it's challenging. You got to get things up and running. But then eventually, I don't want to say it's easy, but things start to move fast. Like you said, you got your first client. You asked her, got your first client. She then helped you find other clients, and that spread to other clients. So it kind of spread pretty quick in the beginning. And for a lot of businesses, it's the same. You start, it's hard in the beginning, but then things grow kind of fast. In fitness, it's the same. It's hard to start in the beginning. You get started and you make progress pretty quick, but then it stops. And that's the tricky part. But that's how it's exactly correlated with business. Business is the same way. Things will grow quick, but then it'll stop and you're like, "Oh crap. What do I do? What do I do now?" And then you start to freak out and you're like, "Oh, am I doing the right thing?" And it all aligns perfectly. I'm rambling on at this point, but it all aligns perfectly with fitness because so many people quit fitness, quit exercise because of that stop. They don't recognize that that's just a normal part of the cycle. Things are going to slow down eventually. You just have to do something different to get it to start going again. Business is the same way. Things are going to slow down eventually. You just have to do something different to get it going again. So is that what you found to be kind of a good correlate there?
I mean, yes, and in everything in life. I mean, everything is like that. Relationships are like that. I think that our self-growth is like that. I think there's so many things that we look at, and it's just like life is a journey, and just like fitness is a journey. And I think that when you can start to look, I'm not trying to make the transition here, but it's so true. If you can start to look at things like, hey, it's not that I'm going to use fitness competing and I'm getting ready for this event where I'm going to be in the tip top shape. No, it's like, hey, let me enjoy the process of the 12 weeks that it's going to take me to diet down and to get in shape, because through that I'm learning, through that I'm growing, through that I'm training my mind to be disciplined. And that follows you throughout life. That's so important in every aspect of life. Like every problem you're faced with, and even fitness, it goes back to that too. Like when you get to a place where you're trying to make your shoulders are not lined up with the rest of your physique, you're trying to grow them a little bit. Well, that's a problem, and it takes somebody to solve that problem, and it takes trial and error. It's not a cut and dry like just do this, it's going to grow your shoulders. No, it's like trying different exercises, trying different diets, trying different macros, trying different supplements, like whatever, and then when you start competing, it's like now you have to be sure that this muscle doesn't grow, but this one does. And it's very like technical. But I think if we could look at life like that, it's like, but not in a bad way, but embrace the 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 journey. I think it's so important. If we can learn to do that, there's where happiness lies.
Hmm. Oh, that's so good. Yeah, I mean, I think my belief is that human beings are biologically built to progress. They're built to grow. Um, if you just look at our ancestors, like our ancestors had to progress and move and grow and become better and learn their environment and figure out their environment. Otherwise, they literally wouldn't have survived another day potentially. So they had literally no option but to do that. And that's ingrained in our biology. It's ingrained in our brain. It's ingrained in the dopamine hit that whenever we, what, the dopamine hit we get whenever we do something good, the serotonin release whenever we do something good, the other neurotransmitters that happen whenever we achieve something good. That's from progress. That's from doing something and then achieving something. So I think a lot of the angst that people feel today, like people who are just kind of indifferent about how life is, it's because of a lack of progress in something, whether that's fitness, whether that's business, whether that's pursuing something, pursuing some sort of purpose in life. It's just missing that and not recognizing that that is something that a human being needs to feel a level of fulfillment.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And, I don't know how you or your listeners feel about God, but I honestly feel like if, like, I'm a Christian, I feel like we are made to be creators. The Bible says we're made in the image of God. If we're made in the image of God and He's a creator, then we're creators. And I know for myself, like, as if I'm creating something, whether that be a business that's going to provide for my family, or it's going to be creating something that's going to be purpose driven and, help other people, whatever that looks like, or any, even on a more superficial, like if I decided I was going to build a house or put together a desk, like there's a sense of accomplishment in that. And I feel like there, like it's hard work, but there's beauty in hard work.
Mm,
I wish people could kind of like make that connection and make that shift in their mind to where now I embrace hard work because it's good. It's teaching me. I'm growing through it. But I think some people, not all. I mean, I've been around some amazing mentors that has helped me shape the way that I think. But I'm also around people that don't think that way too. And it's really disheartening to me to hear people, when they talk negative about themselves, or they're just down on themselves, or their victim mentality. Like it breaks my heart because I'm like, life is so much, there's so much to explore once you understand, like you gain a different perspective of it.
for sure, for sure. So what do you think helped you most from your fitness journey when you started growing your business? What were some of the aspects or, uh, you know, mental resilience or mindset things that you built over the time of your fitness journey that helped you as you started growing your business?
Well, I'll say I think business is so much harder than fitness. Now, if you take somebody that's successful
Fair.
in business
That's fair.
and they've struggled with their weight or struggled with getting in the gym, they might disagree with me because each person's different. But for me, on my journey, like business was much harder. And I don't know if that's because I I do have like kind of this go-getter like mentality, but I'm also extremely hard-headed. And I'm like, if I don't know how things work, I just don't do it. And so I would know that I would should be doing something in business, but if I didn't know how it worked, I just wouldn't do it. And so I think I struggled in that a lot over the years. I would find success and then I would struggle, and then I'd find success, then I'd struggle. And so I I think with if I compare that back to fitness, the reason why I think I was more successful in fitness is because I understood the science behind it. I understood the science, but I didn't understand the psychology of business, the psychology of sales. I come from a marketing background. So, I mean, I majored in marketing in college. So I understood, but not to the extent that I was like doing all the things that I knew I should be doing, if that makes sense.
You had the knowledge, but you didn't have the application part down.
I just didn't do it. I was
Mm,
like very like it's the word, like not not rigid, but almost like rebellious when it
mm,
comes to like I'm going to do it my way.
mm.
And why try to fix something that's not broken? If you know this works for this many businesses, why not do it? And I've really been blessed to have some amazing, like I said, amazing mentors. And over the years, I would say that I got really serious about building my business about 6 years ago. And it it was those last 6 years that has grown my business, also grown my self growth. So I was kind of doing both simultaneously, and I'm so excited about business because I feel like it was through that I was able to truly grow and find myself and find my purpose. So,
What are
uh,
those parts of yourself that have grown the most then?
well, going back to the whole self-image issue, like I really struggled with I was hard on myself, like always struggling with how I looked, always struggling with how people were perceiving me. Like I struggled to even have conversations because I was constantly worried about how I was looked or viewed or how someone was judging me. And that affects active listening. You can't listen to someone when
100%
you're all
caught up
self-consumed.
in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
And so when I started seeing problems that I had, like issues that I knew I struggled with, I started trying to create something in my business that required me to do that thing. So, for example, I felt like I was a horrible speaker. I'm a horrible listener and I'm a horrible speaker. And so I started a podcast. I mean,
So I started a podcast, so I have to talk all the time now. What's up, guys? I want to jump in here real quick and talk to you about achieving your goals. If you're listening to this podcast, then I know you want to achieve something extraordinary in life, whether that's building a business, getting in the best shape possible, or maximizing your time with your family. And if you want to do any of those things, there's two things you need to be able to master. One of them is time, and the other one is productivity. It starts with managing your time and being able to eliminate the things that are getting in your way so that then you can set your goals and start to break them down into actionable steps and take those steps and interject them into your life so that you can take action and turn those dreams into reality. And in order to help you do that, I created the Alpha Life Action Plan. It's literally a 90-day action plan that does both of those things. Starts with taking your time, figuring out where you're spending it, eliminating the things or delegating the things that you don't need to do so that you can free up your time to then set your goals and break them down into action steps and start to take action on them so that you can achieve the things that you want in life. The Alpha Life Action Plan is yours for free. All you have to do is cover shipping. You can go to goodwolfproject.us/action plan and put in your information there and have it sent to you ASAP. That's goodwolfproject.us/action plan so you can start to take action on those goals and dreams you want to create the life that you deserve.
I
That's
mean,
funny.
it was funny. That's not like it's weird how things work in your life, right? Like it was the podcast, I felt like God told me to start this podcast. But simultaneously, as that's happening, I'm like, okay, I'm also a really bad speaker and I'm also a really bad listener. And therefore, what can I do to become better at those? And I'm like, just jump in and do it. Just start the podcast. How can I become better at it? Just do it. So I did. And if you go back and listen to some of the earlier episodes, I think they were not so good. They were bad. I didn't even really try to grow the podcast at first because I'm like, I
Who
heard
wants to
Russell.
listen? I'm not doing a good job.
Yeah, I heard Russell Brunson say this. He's like, the owner of ClickFunnels. He said, when you first start creating content, he's like, you're not going to have people that watch your content. He's like, but it's a good thing because you're really bad at it. Like anything you first start, you're not good at. So be glad there's not a lot of eyes on it. And so I was like, okay, I'm not going to really necessarily try to grow the podcast, but eventually I will. And that's been one of the reasons that I have not been able to stop the podcast, even though it's it's a lot of work. And but it's now this podcast has evolved into something so much bigger than what I could have ever even imagined, you know.
Which is super cool for sure. And I can totally empathize with what you're saying. I am a natural introvert as well. Uh, People who, so I had the fitness studio for 10 years. Many of the clients, the members that were there were probably 10 or so of them that knew me before I started the studio. I started personal training in another facility, my brother-in-law's gym, actually before that. So I had been training some people for 5 years before even starting the studio. And they knew me for that whole time. The joke that they always said to new members that would come in is, you should have met this dude 15 years ago whenever I first met him, because we'd walk up to the front counter at the gym and he'd sit there at the computer and he'd go, huh, mm, mm-hmm, and just mumble the whole time and just grunt. So that was me. That was like what I was known as, was just the grunting guy, because I didn't know how it was very similar. Probably I was more worried about the words that were coming out of my mouth than actually just having a conversation with somebody. So you can certainly train yourself to talk. You can train yourself to be more. People are surprised when I say I'm an introverted kind of person, because I can just talk to people now. I actually enjoy going up to strangers that are just out and about, and I just start talking to them, start a conversation with them. But it's because I've trained myself to do that. And I'm sure a lot of people would be very surprised by you having some of those self-image issues and things like that, because I just pointing out facts. Like, you're a good looking girl. So it's like, what people probably look at you like, there's no way that you think that. Well, look, this conversation is showing that everyone is an individual and everyone has thoughts about themselves. And you cannot look at a person externally and assume that they have it all figured out and assume that they're completely lined up and assume whatever else you want to assume. We all have our own things. So if you want to go judging somebody because you look at them and you think something about them, there's a good chance you're actually probably moving in the wrong direction. So um, I just think that that's worth thinking about for a lot of people.
Hmm. Yeah, you just never know. And I mean, I tell people this all the time. Like, this is one of the reasons that I do what I do in the podcast because trauma. So it's transformation. It's transformation through trauma was my photo shoots that I did, and then the podcast is called Through the Trauma. So you never know what type of trauma somebody's been through. You don't know. I mean, I have talked to so many people that have amazed me. They've sat in front of me and we've talked about like I recently interviewed a lady who had come out of sex trafficking. Her grandfather sold her into sex trafficking. And you would never know by looking at her. She runs an organization now that helps other women. And it's just I even think I said it to her specifically, like, I would have never guessed. Like, no one would have ever guessed this about you. And, it just goes back to exactly what you're saying. Like, you never know. You don't know what someone's going through in the moment. You don't know what someone's been through. And even, like, I had this conversation with a guest recently. Like, someone cuts you off in traffic and you're just like, you want to cuss at them or flip them a bird or whatever. Um, but I always try to remind myself too, like, okay, I don't know what happened. Maybe they had an argument with their spouse this morning. Maybe they just lost a child. Maybe they are just a rotten person, but I would never know. So why be mean to them? Like, hey, I'm sorry. Sorry that I was in your way or whatever. Like, just, I don't know. I think that's the beauty of like just humanity is being able to like look with empathy and compassion on each other and like you said, just pointing out those things that you never know what someone's been through or what they're going through.
So what else besides wanting to get better at speaking, what else made you start the podcast?
So there's actually a story behind this. I'll share it with you, the short version. So I was doing photography, I was working in fitness, and I had a friend who I went through a divorce. When I went through this divorce, I contacted one of my friends. She was deep in the fitness industry. I'm like, hey, and she was doing a lot with competitors. And I'm like, can you plug me in? Like, I need to be plugged in. She's like, yeah. And so she really helped me. She runs the Nashville Fit Show now and just started plugging me in with just like a ton of people. I'm very grateful to her for this. And so in the mix of the people she plugs me into, she plugs me into this other girl who is a mentor. Um, she helps high level entrepreneurs find their purpose, and she owns an island in the BVI. And she said, "We're doing these retreats on this island. I'd like to have you come out and photograph the retreats, some of them." And so I said, "Oh my God, I would love to." Right. So I go out. I'm sitting at one of these retreats and there's a speaker. She's going back and forth. She's kind of like, and this is a small group, right? Maybe 25 people. And I'm working. I'm not there as a guest. I'm there as a staff. But I'm in the retreat listening to the speech because I'm photographing. And I had this premonition like she's getting ready to call on me. And I'm like, no, she's not. You're just a photographer. She's not going to call on you. She's like, Amber, she's like, what has stole your fire? And when she says this, I'm just like, oh my God, like, I don't know. I said, well, I've been through a divorce. And so she starts going into this whole like tangent about my divorce and the shame and the things that I had felt. And I said, I'll be honest with you, my divorce is not where I feel shame. I said, I feel shame because I used to dance. Like I worked in a club years ago, like years ago, like around the time I was in the fitness industry. And she said, your shame will not leave this island with you. And before that, I couldn't even talk about this. And I had left the island and literally the shame did not go with me. And so I was able to start talking more publicly about this. And when I got back, God just really started placing this on my heart. She had said something to me after that, like another day or so after we'd had this conversation in the middle of the, you know, um, the middle of the speech that she was giving in front of like all the attendees there. And she's like, God has a purpose for your life. And when she said that, the podcast had been something that had been on my mind, but it had not come to the forefront. But when she said that, it was kind of like, okay, now I've sat silently long enough about these things. And I need to, it's like I had to shed that shame before I could like do what I really felt the need to do. So I come back and I started this podcast. I was already doing these photo shoots that was called, Transformation Through Trauma. What that was is I was photographing trauma to triumph. Like I would photograph basically two shoots in one where we'd photograph the emotion and then we'd photograph the triumph. And I found a lot of healing and, a lot of things in myself through this. But over the years, I just have people share it with me. And so it had been on my heart, like, I need a bigger platform to share these stories. And when that happened on the island, I'm like, I come back and it was like God just began to open doors. And I got plugged into a guy who did a podcast. He gave me all kinds of information. I ended up getting another client who I had done a transformation through trauma shoot with, and she had recently started a podcast. She kind of helped me through some things, and doors just opened. And I've it's been that way ever since I started it, even to the point of getting guests. It's like I'll get down to like no guests in my pipeline, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to release one on Friday, and then a guest will pop up. So it's crazy. But just total transformation of what God can do, what I've seen him do in my life, and then what I see him do in other people's lives. And I just feel like the purpose behind this podcast is showing people that just what we said, you never know what somebody's going through. And if we didn't have a conversation, there's things you wouldn't know, but there might be people that need my story. They need my testimony. They need to hear the things that God's done in my life because it could give them hope. And so that's truly my mission behind that podcast is like, if I can bring people on to share stories, maybe I can't relate to those stories, but my listeners can. So it's one of those things where now I'm neck deep in it and I can't stop
No
it,
turning back
but I
now.
wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to. It's been a
That is
blessing.
pretty incredible. And it is it is freeing whenever you actually start to talk about things that you've gone through in your life. You don't realize how much you're actually hanging on to, how much you're holding yourself back, how much you're just relinquishing a lot of yourself because of whatever you're going through. Again, part of my own story, I last year I got divorced and closed a business all within about a 3 month period of time. Business was 10 years old. That was the fitness business. And I was also married for 10 years as well. So a lot of stuff going on during that time, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of uh, an amount of trauma. And one thing that I told myself I was going to do, because that's when I really started to put a lot of focus into the podcast and into content and into moving directionally online. Because before that, most of my energy, of course, was on the studio. So once the studio was gone, I was shifting online and I was reaching out to podcasts and trying to get on podcasts. And I'm like, I'm going to not allow myself to just bottle everything up and not talk about it. I'm going to talk as much as I can comfortably if I'm asked about what's happening in my life or whatever the scenario is. So I made sure to do that, and that was super helpful in allowing me to transform through that time frame and to be able to process through all of that. And even like whenever I was having conversations on other people's podcasts, somebody would ask me a question, it'd be a different question. And I'd think about something differently. It would allow me to process something differently, which was super helpful. But, I think a lot of people just hold that kind of stuff in. And then again, they don't realize that they're actually holding themselves back because of that. But they also feel like they're the only person going through that. So it's like they have this internal shame. They have this feeling of being lonely and all these other feelings that they're just bottled up, and they don't recognize that there's people. This isn't a, oh, you're not special conversation. This is a, there's other people who have gone through things, and it is freeing to hear that other people have gone through similar things, because you can recognize that you can get through it. That's the freeing part, is you can see that you can also get through it.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so important. And, I think everybody has gone through trauma. I think, people can say, I've never really had anything traumatic, but if you go back deep enough and you dig deep enough, there's things. And trauma, the exact circumstance could happen to you that happened to me, and I could take it more traumatically than you could, or vice versa. And I think that this, over the course of our lives, we pick up like baggage that we just carry with us. And, maybe that's the way we're raised, or the way maybe our parent yelled at us, or, whatever. And it just accumulates over the years. And then we do things, and sometimes we don't know why we do them. Like I've gone
Oh
back
yeah.
in my own life and I've asked myself, like, what kind of, like, what was the really determining factor to my decision making process back then? Like, I don't even know. Um, but you know, at the end of the day, when I went through one of the darkest times in my life, I wish there had been a resource to where I felt alone. I felt completely alone. And I wished there was a resource where I could hear someone say, like, oh yeah, I've been through this. And it would have been helpful for me. So I just hope that I can provide that. And I think podcasting is an amazing platform, like in and of itself. I even when people come on my platform and share their stories, and they have their own podcast, I'm like, let's promote it, because maybe it resonates with somebody. And this platform is amazing because we have you spend an hour with someone, you get to know a little bit more about them than you do just on 30-second content or whatever. So, and you get to learn who they really are, like their mannerisms, their things that it's just you I feel like you get to know them more on a personal level, and it makes it more real. And when people can be vulnerable and share the things that they've been through and the things that's happened to them, it just provides a domino effect of help to other people that need it.
A domino effect of help. I like that a lot. So what are a few things before we wrap up? What time we got? Oh, we're good. We got a couple more minutes. All right. So what are a few things that you have learned from other people's stories?
And um, I I would say the number one thing that I've learned has been how to. This is going to sound weird, but how to set boundaries, and um, how to manage my own emotions to the point of, like, I'm an empath. I do feel people's emotions. When I first started the podcast, I really struggled a lot with, I'd hear stories and then I would be depressed about it. And then I would edit the podcast because I was editing myself. And then I would rehash that.
Feel it again.
And the photos, when I would do these transformation through trauma photo shoots, that was another thing, because then I'm actually seeing a visual of this person's emotions. Like it was hard. And so I would say, when you make the decision that you're going to dive into someone else's trauma, and you're going to open your heart and actively listen to them, actively put yourself, like, empathetically in their place, then you have to set boundaries. You have to know when to feel that feeling, and then you have to know when you need to be strong and stop feeling that feeling so you can actually go out and take action to help. So I'd say that's the number one thing that I've learned. But then if you talk about more superficial skills, I think I've become a better speaker. I got in Toastmasters. I was like, I'm determined to become a better speaker. And I think I've become a better speaker. I think I've definitely become a better listener. I think listening to myself, like, if anyone's not been on a podcast, I highly encourage it, because once you listen to yourself, you're like, oh, Did I sound like that? I, I still pick up
Um,
things. I'm like, oh my God, that was so cringy.
hmm,
Um, but you
cringy.
know, it's I get that from my teenager.
That's good. That's too good. Um, the ironic thing is like on the podcast, I don't like listening to myself. It's fine. I can do it and I've gotten over it, but like I'll do Instagram stories pretty regularly. And for some reason, I like watching myself there. I don't know if it's because it's shorter and then because like I feel like I can do a better job of like focusing for that 30 seconds. I'm just going to talk. But on those, like I easily go back and just laugh at myself. If I do something stupid, I just go back and I laugh at myself. But for some reason on the podcast, I don't know if it's because there's a lot more opportunity to screw up. I just I have a harder time with it. But I know what you're saying.
Yeah. I like Instagram reels and things better too, but I think that's because they're filters. I
Yeah.
like their filters. I mean, I like the filters, but on podcasts you don't really filter anything, so it's a little more real, I feel like.
Well, it is. And I think, like you said, that's kind of the whole purpose of it. And that's what kind of makes it special is that it is real. It is
Mhm.
authentic. Like you and I are sitting here talking, and sure, I can go and edit out anything that I think I said stupid or you wanted to edit out or blah, blah, blah. But like, I've never edited out anything of any podcast. And as far as I can think, I don't plan to. So like this is authentic. This is you and I having a conversation. And if you hear long pauses, it's because one of us is either thinking or just baffled and don't know what to say. And that's the way real life is. You have
Yep.
times where you're like, yeah, I don't really know what to say about that. We were talking beforehand about people asking random questions at the end of a podcast, which by the way, I have. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have one. You'd be like, oh no.
It's like, you
Um,
tricked me. You
yeah,
tricked me.
but people having random questions and you're just like, what? I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that question. So yeah, I mean that's the beauty of podcasting for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, I love podcasting. I think it's an amazing platform. And I think that it does truly help people. And, especially with the media and the way things are, like things are being pushed down our throats as a culture, I feel like. But podcasting has the potential to really change that, because now you're able to sit with someone and get different views and opinions. Like I've been really blessed to sit with some of the people that I've sat with and gather, I've been certain things that I believed. Then when I would sit with someone and they would bring up a valid point, I'm like, okay, let me go dwell on this and think about it a little bit. And I've had my opinions shift because of things that people have said on podcasts.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's super powerful. Well, you're certainly a light amongst all of this, and I know that your podcast is as well. By the way, I listened to some of your early podcasts, and trust me, you didn't sound as bad as you thought you sound. You were doing a great job for sure.
Thank you.
But if people want to find you, where can they find you? Where can they find your podcast? In case you want to hear more.
Yeah. So my podcast is streamed on all major platforms. It's called Through the Trauma. It's just me with my camera on there. That's my cover right now. And I you can also find me. I'm very active on Instagram. On Powerography Files is that's like my agency, which is like my photography, videography, and then we do some branding and social media stuff on there. And then my personal Instagram is the underscore Amber underscore Larkins. And that's where you find a lot of like just me. I mean, I'm really heavy in self-growth. So I post a lot of things but I post a lot of vulnerable things too. Like when I feel something, I post it. I think that should be how content should be
Mhm.
put out there. So when I find something inspiring or whatever, I just post it. And then my podcast is also there on YouTube. So that's under Empowerography Files as well. Or you can search my name, Amber Larkins.
Very good. Amber, appreciate you so much. Great conversation. Keep delivering to everybody and keep helping people. I know that you will, and I know that you've helped a lot already.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.